I wasn't expecting it. I was just scrolling, moving through the noise like everyone else, and then your words appeared. I just stopped because in a world that moves so fast, where everything disappears in seconds, your comment stayed. It stayed in my chest. I don't know if you knew what you were doing when you wrote that, but I felt it, every single word. I thought to myself, who is this person who just reached through a screen and made the whole world go quiet? That was you. That was your comment. And yeah, you shocked me. I wasn't supposed to feel anything that day. I was just there, existing in the usual way people exist when they're not really paying attention to anything in particular, scrolling through words and images that all blur into one another after a while. None of it sticking, none of it mattering, none of it reaching the part of you that actually feels things. You know how that goes. You move through the digital world like you move through a crowded street sometimes. Surrounded by everything, touched by nothing. That was me. That was exactly me in that moment before I saw what you wrote. And then there it was, your comment, just sitting there among all the other words like it belonged, like it was nothing, like you hadn't just quietly placed something extraordinary into an ordinary space. I don't even think you knew. That's the part that gets me most when I think about it now. I don't think you had any idea what those words were going to do once they landed. You probably typed them and moved on with your day, went back to your life, maybe made coffee or looked out a window or thought about something else entirely. You had no idea that somewhere someone was about to read what you wrote and feel the ground shift just slightly beneath them, because that is what happened. That is the only honest way I know how to describe it. The ground shifted. Not dramatically, not in the way of earthquakes or catastrophes, but more like the way the air changes. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. If you're paying attention, and I was paying attention suddenly for the first time in what felt like a long time, I was paying very close attention to your words, to the way you'd chosen them, to the fact that out of all the ways a person could express what you were expressing, you had chosen exactly those words in exactly that order. Somehow that specific arrangement had reached something in me that I hadn't even realized was reachable. I read it once, and then I read it again, and then a third time. Not because I hadn't understood it the first time, but because I wanted to stay inside the feeling it gave me for a little longer. You ever do that with something beautiful? You don't rush past it, you slow down, you let it exist around you for a moment. That was me with your comment, just sitting with it, just letting it be real. There's something about being seen, truly seen, even accidentally, even through something as small as a comment. In a space full of noise that does something to a person, something quiet and enormous at the same time. Because most of our days are spent being mostly invisible to each other, aren't they? We pass through each other's peripheries. We exist near each other without ever really arriving at each other. And you get used to that. You adjust to that particular kind of loneliness until it doesn't even feel like loneliness anymore. It just feels like normal. It just feels like the texture of regular life. And then someone writes something, someone puts words together in a way that makes you feel, for just a moment, like maybe you are not as invisible as you thought. Like maybe something about you, something real and specific and true, has been noticed by someone who didn't have to notice it, who had no obligation to look, who simply looked anyway. That is an unexpected gift. That is one of the rarest things there is. And I wasn't ready for it, I want to be honest. I was not prepared for it. There's something both humbling and disorienting about being caught off guard by your own feelings. You think you know the shape of your days. You think you know what to expect from a Tuesday or a Thursday or whatever ordinary day it was. You think you know which moments are going to matter and which ones are just going to pass. And then life does what it always does, which is remind you gently or not so gently that you actually don't know anything about which moments are going to stay with you. You can't predict it. You can't prepare for it. The moments that matter most have a way of arriving without announcing themselves. Yours arrived like that, quietly, without ceremony, without warning, just a comment in a sea of comments, just words on a screen, just someone saying something that they felt compelled to say. And yet somehow those words crossed whatever distance exists between two people who don't know each other and arrived exactly where they needed to arrive in me exactly then. I've been trying to understand the mechanics of that ever since. Why those words? Why that moment? Why did something so small create such a large and lasting impression? And I think it's because honesty has a particular weight to it. When someone is genuinely, unperformatively honest, not honest because they're trying to impress anyone or because they're performing vulnerability for an audience, but honest simply because that's what the moment called for, you can feel it. It has a different texture than everything else. It lands differently. It stays differently. And what you wrote had that quality, that unmistakable quality of someone who is simply telling the truth because the truth is what they have. And I felt the truth of it. I felt it in the way that makes you press your hand to your chest without even deciding to, in the way that makes you exhale slowly, in the way that makes you stop whatever you were doing and just be still for a moment because stillness feels like the only response. We don't always get real. We get a lot of things. We get entertaining and we get clever and we get loud and we get polished and we get performed. But real is something different. Real is something rare. Real is the thing that reaches you when your defenses are down and your expectations are ordinary and you're just existing, just breathing, just being a person on an average day. Real reached me through your comment, and I haven't been entirely the same since, which is a strange thing to say about something so seemingly small. But the strange thing about truth is that it doesn't respect scale. It doesn't care whether it arrives in a grand gesture or a quiet sentence. It doesn't require a dramatic setting or a significant occasion. It just arrives and it changes the arrangement of things inside you. And you find yourself carrying something new that you didn't have before. Something you can't quite name but can absolutely feel. Something that lives in the space between your ribs now. It makes itself known every time you think about that moment, about that comment, about the person who wrote it without knowing what they were writing, without knowing where it would land, without knowing that somewhere someone would read those words and feel, for the first time in longer than they could remember, genuinely and completely shocked into presence, shocked into caring again, shocked into noticing again, shocked into the beautiful and terrifying realization that you are not as closed off as you thought you were, that something in you is still open, still soft, still capable of being reached by the right words from the right person at the right moment, and that this is not a weakness, this is not something to be embarrassed about or to quickly recover from. This is one of the most human and valuable things about you. This capacity to be moved, this capacity to feel the weight of honest words, this capacity to have a stranger's comment sit down inside you like it belongs there. I want you to know that wherever you are, whatever you were thinking about when you wrote what you wrote, however little you may have expected those words to matter beyond the moment you typed them, they mattered. They are still mattering. They are still sitting in the place where they landed, present and unmoving. And I find myself returning to them the way you return to something you can't explain but can't dismiss. The way you return to a feeling that doesn't quite have a name yet, but demands to be acknowledged. The way you return to the beginning of something you're only just beginning to understand is a beginning. There are things that touch you without touching you. That is a real phenomenon. That is something that happens in this life that nobody quite prepares you for. Nobody sits you down and explains to you when you are young and still learning the basic rules of how the world works and how people affect each other, that one day you will encounter something so powerful. A piece of music, a line in a book, a look across a room, a few words written by someone you have never met, and it will reach inside you and rearrange something fundamental without ever making physical contact, without ever crossing the literal distance between one human being and another. Nobody warns you about that specific kind of impact. And so when it happens, when it finally happens to you, you are never ready. You are always caught completely off guard. You are always standing there in the aftermath wondering how something so intangible could leave such a tangible mark. Your words did that to me. Your words reached me the way only the most honest and unexpectedly true things reach a person. Not through the front door, not through the places you keep guarded and prepared for incoming feeling, but through some side entrance you didn't know existed. Some undefended corridor in you that leads directly to the center of things. That is where your words went, straight to the center. They went without asking permission, without announcing themselves, without giving me any opportunity to decide whether or not I was ready to receive them, because readiness had nothing to do with it. They arrived and they landed and they settled. And by the time I understood what was happening, it was already done. The impression was already made. The feeling was already fully formed and living inside me like it had always been there, like it had simply been waiting for the right words to wake it up. I keep thinking about what it means that words can do this. That language, this system of symbols we invented to communicate practical things, to point at objects and describe events and organize our shared reality, can somehow carry feeling inside it, can somehow transmit the interior experience of one human being directly into the interior experience of another human being across any distance, across any silence, across any gap that might otherwise make connection seem impossible. It is extraordinary when you actually stop to think about it. It is one of the most extraordinary things about being human that we found a way to reach each other, that we built this fragile and imprecise and endlessly beautiful bridge between one consciousness and another. And that sometimes, on rare and unrepeatable occasions, someone uses that bridge in exactly the right way. And something crosses over that is more than information, more than communication, more than the surface meaning of the words themselves. Something like recognition crossed over when I read what you wrote. Something like being known. And I need to try to explain what that feels like, because I don't think it gets talked about enough. The specific texture of feeling recognized by someone who had no particular reason to see you. No special knowledge of you, no context for understanding the specific shape of what you carry around inside you every day. Most of the time we move through the world presenting edited versions. We show cleaned up and organized versions that have been curated for consumption by an audience that includes everyone from our closest people to complete strangers. We learn early to manage our presentation. We learn early that not everything inside us is suitable for public display. Not because we are hiding anything shameful, but simply because depth requires a certain kind of intimacy to be shared. And not every interaction offers that intimacy. And so we learn to keep the deeper parts of ourselves in reserve, available only under specific conditions. Available only when the situation feels safe enough and the person feels trustworthy enough and the moment feels real enough. And then sometimes someone bypasses all of that. Sometimes someone, without knowing they are doing it, without any special access or privileged information, writes something that speaks directly to one of those deeper parts. Something that reaches past the curated surface and arrives at something true. You feel it happen in real time. You feel the words land somewhere further than words usually land. You feel the specific quality of being addressed. Not in the general way that most communication addresses you, not as a demographic, not as a type, not as an assumed set of preferences and expectations, but as yourself, as the specific and particular and irreplaceable version of yourself that exists beneath all the editing. As the person you actually are when nobody is performing and nothing is being managed and you are simply quietly fully present in your own life. Your words found that person. I don't know how, I genuinely do not know how you did it, and I'm not sure you do either. And maybe that is the most beautiful part of it, that it wasn't calculated, that it wasn't strategic, that you weren't trying to reach me in any particular way. You were simply being honest and present and unguarded in your own expression. That quality of unguardedness traveled through your words. It arrived in me as recognition, as the feeling of being seen. That is what honesty does when it travels through language. It doesn't just convey information about the speaker, it somehow creates a space where the listener can also feel seen, can also feel real, can also feel that their particular and private experience of being alive has been acknowledged by another living person who is experiencing something that rhymes with it. Your comment rhymed with something in me. That is the most precise way I can say it. There was a correspondence between what you expressed and something I carry, some private frequency that your words happen to match. And when two things vibrate at the same frequency, there is a resonance, there is a joining, there is a moment of recognition so clean and clear it almost hurts, the way certain kinds of beauty almost hurt. The way joy can have an edge of pain to it simply because it is so acute and so real and so temporary and so precious all at once. I felt that resonance when I read what you wrote. I felt my own private frequency recognized and answered. And that is not nothing. That is not a small thing. That is actually one of the largest things that can happen between two people. Even two people who have never spoken. Even two people who exist only at the very edges of each other's awareness. Even two people separated by whatever distances separate them. Geographic, experiential, circumstantial. None of that distance prevented what happened. None of that distance was sufficient to stop your words from crossing over and doing what they did. Because that is the thing about genuine feeling expressed through honest language. It does not respect distance. It does not require proximity. It moves through whatever separates two people the way certain kinds of light move through certain kinds of material. Not by going around the obstacle, not by finding a gap, but by passing directly through, by being the kind of thing that obstacles cannot stop. Your feeling passed directly through into me, into the part of me that receives things, into the part of me that has been quietly waiting without even knowing it was waiting for something that felt real enough to respond to. Because there is a part of every person that waits like that. I think a part that is always slightly listening, always slightly oriented toward the possibility of genuine connection, always quietly hoping that among all the noise and surface and performance and edited presentation of the world, something true will arrive, something real, something that doesn't require any adjustment or translation or interpretation, something that simply is what it is and speaks to you directly and honestly and without agenda. And your only job in response to it is to feel it, to let it in, to allow yourself to be affected by it without immediately reaching for the mechanisms of protection and distance that you have spent years carefully constructing for yourself along the way. I let it in. That is what I want to tell you. Whatever you put into those words, whatever feeling, whatever honesty, whatever unguarded piece of yourself you allowed to travel through language and land in a public space where anyone might encounter it, I received it. I received it fully and without resistance and without trying to diminish it or rationalize it or reduce it to something smaller and more manageable. I let it be what it was. I let it do what it did. I let your words have their full effect on me without flinching away from that effect, without telling myself that the appropriate response to being moved by something is to pretend you haven't been moved, without performing the kind of emotional invulnerability that we sometimes mistake for strength, but which is actually just a very sophisticated way of keeping yourself from feeling your own life. I felt my life when I read your comment. I felt it in a way I hadn't felt it in a while, which is its own kind of admission. It is its own kind of vulnerability, but it's the truth. And the truth is what this is. The truth is the only currency that feels worth spending here. The truth is that something in me had gone a little quiet, a little distant, a little muted in the way things go muted when you have been moving through your days efficiently and competently and largely without interruption, doing what needs to be done, being where you need to be, functioning in all the ways that the world requires you to function, but not necessarily feeling the full weight and texture and color of your own existence in the way that you once did, in the way that you know is possible, in the way that reminds you what it actually means to be alive and present and open and human. Your words interrupted that muting. Your words broke through that particular kind of quiet and arrived in me as color, as texture, as the full and vivid and startling reminder that I am still capable of this, still capable of being reached.